me. Not Barry. We're going to go on the road. We're going on the road. My name is Barry Newport. I'm the producing artistic director here at GableStage. I have to ask, how many of you have never been here before? Don't be shy. Because we're going to give you tickets tonight because I so badly want you to come to the show that we currently have running this week, which was, I think, the impetus for you hosting and reaching out to host this panel tonight here. Friends, colleagues, can we get some tickets ready? If you've never been here before, please come as our guests. We have 6 more performances this week, 2 tomorrow, then Thursday, Friday, 2 on Saturday, and a matinee on Sunday. You will not be disappointed. It is a play called We Will Not Be Silent, which tells the true story of Sophie Scholl and the White Rose, which is a story that I was unfamiliar with. But Sophie Scholl and her colleagues at the White Rose were all students. Sophie was 21 and her brother was 24. And they were so disgusted as humans by what was going on in Nazi Germany that they took it upon themselves to write a series of newsletters called The White Rose, which they covertly distributed to 17 different German cities. And it's the story of how only a few people's voices can make a huge difference, specifically a young person's voice. It's a real Joan of Arc story, and I would love to host you all here at GableStage.
And the play was great.
I was just saying that, and I remember, I know you from GableStage, but also I was at the Champions MCCJ dinner last year, where you were celebrated, and I was there with George Hodge, who we share as a board member, a fabulous board member. But that was really my first introduction to MCCJ. I moved here a year and a half ago, and that night was so important to me, not just because we waited for our cars together and had a great conversation, but because I was so inspired by all the conversations on stage, all the people I met. It was really, really a special night that really engraved itself in my mind. But most importantly, it formed a relationship between you and me. And it's been so fun to partner together, not just tonight, but for the last year and a half, we've done a number of things together, and I hope we can continue.
You know, this is home.
This is home. This is home. Thank you all for coming, and I'm so looking forward to this conversation.
Good evening, friends. My name is Matt Anderson. I'm MCCJ's Executive Director, and I second Barry. If you have not been to the play, please go. It's an incredible story that really resonates with what's going on today. A little bit about MCCJ. At MCCJ, we are hyper-focused on embracing diversity and building an inclusive Miami through our program. And for almost 90 years, we've been convening the community with really tough conversations. Right now, the level of hate crimes, the level of prejudice in this country, in this state alone, is just disgusting. And this type of prejudice has really affected the Black community and the Jewish community for the longest time. And if you listen to the press, Black and the Jewish community aren't really friends. But really, it's just like any other relationship. It takes nourishment, it takes communication, and when communication ceases or is minimal, communication gets muddled. So now it's time to go back to the basics and get us talking again. And it's not easy, and I'm really thankful for this journey that this team has been on in preparing for tonight. They've put a lot of trust in one another, and they've trusted the process, which is really, really important. And they've made themselves vulnerable, and it's really incredible to see the Zoom conversations, which in prepping tonight, I think you're going to be very impressed. And with that said, I'd like to give the stage to our maestro, Matt Beatty, the Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Carrie Meek Foundation, who's going to continue this journey as our captain tonight. So please put our hands together for the panel.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Matt and MCCJ, not only for this kind invitation tonight, but for all that you do to build across lines of difference in our community. Just thank you. Thank you for that. As Matt mentioned, we are in a really tough time in our history. Anti-Semitic attacks account for the majority of religiously motivated hate crimes in this country. Black people continue to be marginalized by racist policies, both here in our state and across the US. We have work to do, people. We got a lot of work to do. And your being here tonight is indicating that you are willing to do that work. So thank you to each of you for coming with us on this journey today. The weight of our reality and the lived experience, plus historic and generational trauma, it can lead us to define ourselves by our struggle. But the truth is that there's so much regarding our hopes and our dreams and our aspirations that we share in common. And that is such a stronger way to bind us in community than defining ourselves by our historic traumas. And so today, that's what we want to focus on. What are our mutual aspirations and dreams as a people, as Black people, as Jewish people, as residents of Miami-Dade and of South Florida? What can we do to bridge these gaps, but not defining by our deficits, defining those gaps by our assets, and building those bridges effectively so that we can live together in community as we all desire to. And so, as we get started this evening, let's just keep that as our North Star, that we are focused on solutions, we are focused on building bridges, and we are focusing on taking action and personal responsibility for our role to build these bridges in our community. So before we jump in, and I'll share some norms for the conversation in a moment, but I first love for the panel to introduce themselves, and we'll start all the way to my right with Brian, and we'll go right across. So, Brian.
Brian Siegal. I am the director of the American Jewish Committee in Miami. We're a global Jewish advocacy organization. We have offices around the world, and we seek to safeguard the Jewish people around the world, to promote Israel's right to peace and security, and to advance human rights and democracy and civil rights for all people. I've been the director here in Miami for about 15 years, and I can tell you this has been one of the greatest experiences of my life. And Miami is the perfect place, and we are the future. So I think this conversation and others like it are so essential, because as goes Miami, goes the rest of our country. So I'm privileged and honored to be here, appreciative to MCCJ and Matt Anderson, a very close friend, and just honored to be with these other panelists and get to know them and consider them friends.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Really good to see all of you. My name is Guerda Nicolas. I am a professor at University of Miami. I am a psychologist by training, a little bit over 30 years of experience. I've been at UM now for 15 years as a recruit from Danial, who yanked me from a global committee that we were in together, where I was a professor at Boston College for 15 years before coming to UM. My work centers around diversity, inclusion, racism, health disparity. Not only do I teach it, I research it, we write about it, the program related to it. We've been a central part of conversations with MCCJ since we came in. As many of you remember, Roberta was my first introduction to Miami here. I remember her on this evening as just a significant friend as well, in hosting community dialogues, here in Miami on a yearly basis, focusing on diversity and with building those bridges between our various communities. So very excited to be a part of this conversation, coming out of sabbatical, from by Matt. And so I flew back in just so I can come back and participate in the conversation. So we're excited to be here.
And thank you everyone for being here. My name is Monique Hayes. I'm a native Miamian. I'm an attorney, a practicing bankruptcy lawyer here in South Florida. I'm also a past president of the Wilkie B. Ferguson Junior Bar Association, which is the Black Bar Association here in South Florida. In addition to that, I am a member of the Unrepresented People's Positive Action Council, which is founded by Commissioner Beatty Ferguson. And at my core, I think the best way, thank you. hope that you can hear me out. I'll try to enunciate a little bit better for you. But at my core, and the gist of it is that I'm a servant leader. And that's who I am, and that's how I live my life, and that's what brings me to this conversation.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Lomax. Not a native of Miami. I'm from up north. It's a place called Broward County. So I journeyed south to obtain an education at the finest university, University of Miami, and fell in love with the city. And I've been here for most of my adult life. After I graduated from the University of Miami, I moved to Washington, D.C. To work at the Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Division. Then I got married, and my wife thought we should live in the same city, so we came back to Miami. So since I've been back, I've worked at law firms. I started my own law firm about 1.5 years ago. I teach a civil rights course at the University of Miami School of Law, and I'm the current president of the Wilkie D. Ferguson Junior Bar Association, and completely delighted to be here with many of you new and familiar faces.
Good evening, everybody, and thanks for being here. My name is Mojdeh Khagan Danial. I'm originally born and raised in Iran. I've been in the United States for 41 years. I've been a Miamian for 28 years, so I'm Iranian, American, Jewish, professional volunteer. You can take all of those in any order that you wish. I'm proud of all of them. I am extremely proud to be chairing the JCRC of the Greater Miami Jewish Federation. That's the Jewish Community Relations Council, which does a lot of the public affairs and legislative policy and advocacy on behalf of the Jewish community. I'm also on the Florida Bar Grievance Committee because I'm an attorney along with my other peers here, and I think that's enough about me.
So before we jump in, and I absolutely want this to be a conversation. I love that we're more intimate tonight so we can actually have some interaction and dialogue, but a couple of norms so that we can make sure that we come out of here with some positive outcomes. First, let's respect each other's emotions, experiences, and opinions. We cannot dictate anyone else's reality in this room. All we know is our own reality. So let's make sure that we create the space for everyone to share their reality. That means that we can't soapbox because we gotta create time and space for everyone to be able to contribute. And we absolutely have to allow everyone to complete their thought and finish their sentences. Second, we are all here to learn and to understand. And so that means that we actually may be doing a bit more listening than talking. But that's okay if our goal here is to build that understanding. Along those lines, you may hear something that you find offensive this evening. And honestly, that's okay. That is why we are here. We are here to have these tough conversations. So let's lean into those places that make us a bit uncomfortable because that's where the real work is going to be done. And then lastly, again, let's stay focused on solutions and action. We don't need another gripe session in this town. We know the challenges, we'll explore them, but let's explore them through the lens of how we can fix them. Sound good? All right, let's do it. So, to get us started, and this is open to anyone on the panel, let's look at what is our current reality. Where are we as Black people living in South Florida, as Jewish people living in South Florida, and in the US, and in America? What is our current experience, and how did we get here? Anyone can kick us off. Don't all speak at once. Okay, I'll call on someone.
I can start on that, and I think we're all at a precarious space right now. In terms of where we are as communities, first I would try to center that there are more alignments and experiences as Black and Jewish communities, but there's also the need to recognize that there are many Black Jews who either by conversion or by birthright affiliate and subscribe to the Jewish faith. And so I want to be sure that we're not always and automatically separating the two communities as if they are not one, not only in the work that the communities do together, but also in the life that the communities live together. I would like to start by acknowledging that we are one. And there are many of us that are a lot more ingrained and engaged than others, but we are still one. And then appreciating that we are still one, we are under attack. There is no other way to say it. In this country, in this state, in this world, as one, as a community, there is no way to deny attacks on the Black community. There is no way to disregard the attacks on the Jewish community. And so we're in a very difficult place, and that is where I find ourselves.
I've been thinking a lot about this. Last Monday we celebrated Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and then this Friday will mark International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And then hearing about the show that's showing here of these young people who stood up and not only risked their lives, but gave their lives to stand up for what they believed in and standing against evil. And I think that it makes, in the context of this conversation, it makes us ask the question, how do we show up for each other? What does it mean to stand up with someone and really at risk to yourself? I think we have this incredible legacy, of course, of this relationship, in the civil rights movement. And we all hear a lot about that. And I think it's an important thing to study, and it's an important inspiration for all of us to understand that there was this time where the African American and Jewish communities stood together. But Black-Jewish relations didn't start with the civil rights movement. It started way before, and there are great stories of the Rosenwald schools where Booker T. Washington and Julius Rosenwald, really two storied figures in history, stood together and built schools together that really benefited thousands of kids. We are under attack, and I want to mention that in a minute. But I think one of the things I've learned in my time in Miami, and a lot of my teachers are sitting in this audience, is that this relationship, like many relationships, has to be based on intentionality. Because Miami, as diverse as we are, we're very siloed, and we're very isolated from each other. And unless we make the effort, we don't see each other, and even when we do, we don't have the meaningful conversations. So, there's a concept in Hebrew called Khagan, which is intentionality. We have to go out of our comfort zone and know what our intent is. And in conversations that I've had in this community, it started with Rabbi Solomon Schiff of blessed memory, who really, taught me so much about the history of racism in this community and of anti-Semitism when both of our communities were not allowed to live in certain places and go to certain places. And from there, meeting people in this community like H.T. Smith, meeting people who are determined that this relationship is so important. And I think we'll hear more about it, but I mean, one of those people here, John Kozak, who I think one of the things that I try and do, or learn from at least, are people who lead by example. And the mentoring program he's created, I recognize that my kids growing up in Pinecrest were not really being exposed to kids of any difference. And so I was so appreciative that the Jewish Community Relations Council, which Mojdeh chairs and which Josh Sales is here as the director, created a Teens Advocating Together program with students from the Black community and Jewish community, and they learn how to advocate on issues together. It's that type of intentionality that we all have to find, because the conversation and being open to it is one thing, but then thinking about how do we lift each other up? What are the ways that our two communities can follow that tradition that we found? I'll say a few words in a little while about sort of hate crimes and what Monique, mentioned. That, when you look at the FBI statistics, the Black community is the most targeted community of hate crimes in the country. Well over 2,000, constituting 35% of all hate crimes. The Jewish community, in terms of religiously based hate crimes, which is a smaller subset, is the largest, target for religiously based hate crimes. And, this shows us that our society is not going in the right direction. And, we have to find ways to stand together. It's one of these times, I think we're at a crossroads. And, it's not going to make itself better. We have to make it better.
Thank you for that. So let me just couch this by how I'm coming to this conversation, just so you can sort of understand a little bit what I'm about to share. So I was born in a country called Haiti. In Haiti, we welcome a little bit over 50,000 Jews in the house. But this is my growing up years. In a predominantly Black nation that welcomed Jews into the country as a place of freedom, because we believe in humanity and we believe in the fact that everybody should be free. That's how I grew up, right, in that presence of that. I immigrated to the United States in a place called Brooklyn, New York. And in Brooklyn, New York, I immigrated at a time where Blacks and Jews were together. It seemed very familiar to how I grew up in country, in the sense of the ways that we thought about our relationship with Jews. So we grew up in a very oppressive place where we were not able to go to restaurants, and we were told to drink from the same water fountain, because the water fountains, remember them vividly saying, the signs were clear, no Jews, no Blacks. And that's how I grew up, in a sense, this group of family space, right, that we were together in such a way, right, as family. So I'm coming to this conversation about family, about coming together as a group, as individuals who sort of were in similar places and similar, and trying to understand like what has happened from the time that we grew up in this space where it feels like, believe me when I said my experience was that when somebody talked negatively about a Jew, we felt it. And we felt the need to respond in the same way, because it meant somebody in my home was being under attack. And there was a need to respond to that, right? Because we were together. And so the question for me has been like, what has happened? What has this society and the system led us to be in this place where we're having a conversation about Blacks and Jews, right? And what does that all mean? And at the same time, I come to, and so I want to share with you two experiences I've had in Miami. And when things happen to you, you look to your family members and your friends, because that's who's going to have your back, and there's an expectation that I have that that's what I'm going to get. So I moved to Miami, and I'm not really exposed to a whole lot of places, except for a very small number of places. When you get recruited to UM, you should know, especially if you come in as an administrator. They are very cool places of where they think you should live. So I lived in Pinecrest, because that's where our wheelchair took us. So I moved to Pinecrest, where we lived, and for the very first about 2 or 3 years of living in Pinecrest, I got pulled over about 80% of the time that I was in Pinecrest. And most of the time, the cop would say, hi, I'm just checking to see, are you lost? Can we help you? And then for a very good period of time, I used to say, no, I'm not lost. I live here, and I used to get my driver's license, show where I was. And after a little bit of time, I started, and then I would go home and I would be engaging with my neighbors, who also happens to be, some of them are Jews, and I tell the story because I'm like, they're gonna have my back. Because it's like a family conversation that we're having. Like somebody's gonna say, don't worry about it, Guerda, we're gonna take you to the Pinecrest police and we're gonna get this one straightened out for you. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen. I finally get to the place now where the cops pull me over in Pinecrest and they say, are you lost? I say, yes, I am. Can you please help me get home? And that's what I would say. And then, then they see that as a joke. I'm like, yes, let me follow you, to my home that I've lived in for the last couple of years, right? And so on. Then if you fast forward that, for me, recently, we had this Thrive 305 survey that went out to so many people. And we've decided to pull that data and take a look at it by zip code or by those who identified in a particular way. And the three things that Haitians and Black folks said out of that survey was that they did not feel that Miami was a welcome place. They did not feel that it was a safe place to be in. But I felt safe in my neighborhood, but I don't feel safe in Miami-Dade. So imagine what that feels like if I leave my house on a regular basis, but when I leave it, I don't have the sense that I feel safe, that I'll come back, right? In the midst of everything else that we have to deal with, like law, whether you're in law, business, or anything else that you're managing and stressing that you're dealing with. And so the question is like, who are my friends? Where should I go? Where would I go to with that? And if I wanted to find people who can resonate with me and the people that I know that I can count on to step up and help with this particular issue, where would I go? So as a person who grew up with Jews, my whole place of home would be a conversation with Jews around this experience of being oppressed and this experience of being marginalized, this experience of just by virtue of who you are, which you cannot do anything about. I cannot do anything about being Black, and I would not want to. I love being Black. I wouldn't give that, I wouldn't change that, despite all of the things and so forth about being Black. But if I'm having that, it's like, where would I want to go as a group and so forth? And I think that's our reality right now. Is that how are we creating the spaces that so when my Jewish friends have an experience because there's a hate crime, they feel like, okay, I'm going to call Guerda and say, Guerda, I need to have coffee with you, and vice versa. It's like, how do we create that?
A lot of folks, and Matt mentioned this as well, talked about how things have changed between the Black community and the Jewish community. And Dr. G, you so beautifully laid out what it was to grow up in Brooklyn, New York, in community with Jewish people and Black people. And then along the way, something shifted. What shifted? What changed? What brought about this state, as Matt said, that in the media, if you were to look, you would think that Blacks and Jewish people do not live in community. So where was that shift? I'll go to the audience.
I've been working in community relations for probably 50 years as the chairman of the Community Relations Board and chairman of the MCCJ. And I think one of the big problems that we're facing is education. I understand what this Matthew said about living at the time, but without the education, and if we have a governor who doesn't want us to learn about the civil rights movement, doesn't want us to learn about Jewish and Haitian immigration, doesn't want to learn about anything that'll hurt somebody's feelings, we're in trouble, and we really need to push education. And I was educated in this, and I think by being active in these groups and being involved, each of us can help, but I think we really have to fight for education.
So, to that question.
I just think that A way to grab power is to pit people against each other and create fear. And I think that seems to be what's going on in our world today, is separating groups of people to create fear and hatred.
I think maybe to the same point, a lack of information and exposure causes unnecessary fear, misunderstanding, and I think what we share in our cultures is a great legacy of creating beautiful things. I'm a jazz musician. There are so many wonderful black jazz musicians and wonderful Jewish jazz musicians and artists, and that shared interest together created something beautiful. And we share in our industry and how we're able to rise out of difficult circumstances. But what we also share are those difficult circumstances. We are a people that both come from a legacy of very tough times. In our tradition, Maya Angelou might say, I know why the caged bird sings. Because the caged bird sings for freedom. She can relate to that. Because she had been a caged bird. When we look at each other, we understand what that means. In a more recent tradition, someone might say, I know how a rose can grow from concrete. Right? And a rose is beautiful in any context, but a rose that can grow from concrete is to be admired in a different way. And so as we continue to progress and go into our silos and get further away from those struggles, sometimes we forget why we were able to align and be united in the first place. The further I get from where I started, the more I forget who I am, who my people are, and why we share these, why we should share an appreciation from where we came from. It's easier to no longer be aligned. And so taking away education and erasing the things that happen as if they are figments of our imagination is only going to create more division. And I think that's the entire goal.
It's the intent.
But we have to, as leaders in the community, as parents, be relentless in making sure that those stories and those traditions are passed on. I won't let it die in my household. I don't care what the school says. I don't care what the government says. The legacy and the history will be taught at my house, and to my kids, and to the friends who come over. So don't send your kids. There's books on my shelf that the government will not allow. But that won't stop me, right? And so we just have to be dedicated to our own education and process, no matter what.
I agree with that. I think what really is missing at this point is bravery. I think it's so easy for a lot of people to just hone themselves and stay safe in their own little circle. The rest of the world may burn, but if they're safe, they're okay. And that's exactly what they want from us. I think more of us need to stand together as we did, I want to say 30-something years ago, because that's when really the change started to shift. There were more communities that stood together against the hate and the division. And since the other side started to notice this, look at the steps that they have taken to make sure that that division is made to happen. They're pitting, one race against the other. They're sufficing, they're giving 1 or 2 victories for one race, so that they can say, hey, you have this, and they're not going to get this because you get to try and get this. And these are the things that they have done, the redistricting. All of that has done just to try to continue to separate every single tribe in their own. And they have been successful because a lot of us have become silent, feeling powerless, that we cannot do anything against what they have done with the laws and the corruption, and with being able to align every single person in line to get their bidding, we have become subservient of that. I think it's very important that we need to go ahead and become more brave and stand against that, and become the, you know, the ones, the brave ones, like the ones who wrote the White Rose, the ones who turned around and decided to the Underground Railroad, the ones who decided to teach the real black history, the Jewish history, to be able to say, this is your truth, this is your future, not what's here.
I agree with you, and I think what I said recently in a similar conversation is that at some point we have to draw the line in the sand. What we are no longer going to tolerate as a community, as a people. And if we don't, we will continue to regress. That bravery has to come about. That's going to make some personal sacrifices. A sacrifice of our individual comforts may have to happen. We may have to take that trip to Tallahassee. We may have to take that trip to Washington. We may have to not allow any progress beyond the line. Not even address or dignify a conversation that would not recognize the requirement of education that is wholesome and accurate to the history, the lived experience of the people that built this country. That line needs to be drawn.
So can we talk, I see a couple of hands, I'm gonna come to those, but I wanna make sure that again, we're focused on solutions. And so we've talked a lot about that need for education and that need to build awareness. And there's arguably two approaches, of course there's more, but two main approaches. One is to work within these systems and constructs to change them, or we can work outside of those systems to create our own constructs that solve that problem. Where is the solution there? Is it creating our own construct? Is it working within the system? Is it both? And if so, what are the specific ways in which we can advance this cause and this issue?
I think it's both and, but I want to hear what.
Okay, so I'm going to take it down from ideals a little bit to more realistic solutions. And I'm very fortunate, I served on the Public Health Trust for Jackson Health System during its recovery years. Okay, I'll shout. And I was very fortunate to serve on the Public Health Trust for Jackson Health System. And Jackson is the 4th largest public health system in the United States. And the priority and the predominant clients and patients are people of color, Black Miamians and Latinos, and it really reflects a lot of the diversity that is Miami. So I had extreme respect in this mission because to provide care in Miami-Dade County, you need to address, and the leadership needs to come from your greatest power base, which is your patient base. And I made it a mission. Jackson got this vote to spend over $1 billion in upgrading infrastructure that the Miami voters supported, and then there was going to be an oversight committee. So we issued applications to create this citizens oversight committee, and there was one applicant that I could tell, looking at the resumes and applications, that this was a young Black man who was stepping up. He had gone to the University of Florida. I could tell from the name, and I'm doing the math, and I'm seeing that he's a young man, and he's, involved in the real estate business, and he's just stepping up to show up and be involved. And I had to fight for my board to give him the opportunity to come in and speak. And they kept saying, oh, but nobody ever heard of him. I said, but this is exactly what we need. We need a young Black leader because this is a reflection of who we're serving, and this is important. So sure enough, this young man, and I really just kept pushing and pushing, and they extended him an invitation, and he came in and he interviewed, and my goodness, everyone became his best friend, and the guys are talking sports things with him because he was a Gator and all of this. And to this day, he's serving there on the Citizens Oversight Committee. He's leading it. And that was a small victory, but to me it was everything. Because I'm a people person. I think most of us, certainly all of you who are here tonight, we are people. We need one another. Like, to me, there's no demarcation, honestly, between Black, Latino, Jewish, not Jewish. I think we're all in it together, and we're very lucky to have one another and have an incredibly diverse community. And again, to me, it's important to reach out. Like, I find this to be such a privilege that I get to, meet and hopefully continue conversations and friendships with each of you, because but for a situation like this, I wouldn't have had that contact. And it's like anything, it's like the seeds that you grow and you nurture it and it will grow. So to me, again, the solution is building those connections across the board throughout the community.
There's been one woman who's very patient right there. We go to her, then right to you.
Good evening, everyone. There are three things I want to say. The first, you asked the question, what happened? How did we split apart? And if I'm recalling, it really started in the late 60s and in the 70s. And it was the time when Black people honestly felt we needed to move and separate ourselves and find out who we were and how we were going to move ourselves forward. And in that relationship with the Jewish community, it didn't break, but it was certainly put on the back burner. So that's one thing. The second thing is I want to marry this young man's concept with this man's concept over here about courage, the notion of courage, and what it takes to be a courageous human being to engage in conversations that are extraordinarily difficult, particularly around both of our cultures. And then the only way you could begin to have that courage is through education and taking the time. You can't do these little 1 hour, 2 hour, one-off kind of things and believe that you're going to make the level of connection. You need to have the difficult conversations to come up with the solutions that we're going to come up with. So my fourth point is, my proposal is we begin to have conversations with Black and Jewish groups where we really talk about and give each other an opportunity to talk about what are my experiences as a Jewish person? Why is Israel so important to me? Do I like Netanyahu? Don't I like him? I mean, and in the Black communities, who are the people that we need to be talking about? How do we get that deep level of engagement, use the courage that we have as individual human beings, and then begin to make that connection again? Otherwise, that's not how we're going to do it. We have to have this kind of conversations. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that was beautifully said, and encourage is so important. I think the other sort of word that comes to mind is trust.
Yes.
Because if we are going to have that open, meaningful conversation, part of what happened, I think, to our groups, this concept of tolerance, we don't want to merely tolerate each other, right? We want to see each other in a sacred relationship. And any relationship that's going to work, it has to be based on trust. It has to be reciprocal. I like this saying, if you want to have a friend, you got to be a friend, right? Don't expect something if you're not going to be willing to give from yourself. And I think that we got to get to a place, where we build that trust, where we, I've had conversations, with friends, Jared Davis, and others, where we can have those honest conversations, where he can tell me some things about perceptions about Israel that's hard for me to hear, but that I can appreciate and I can listen to because I know where it's coming from. It's coming from a place of love and respect, but also of a difference of opinion. And we can have those real conversations, but that takes time, and it takes that sort of willingness to learn about each other, because in both of our communities, and we've heard this from so many people, there's real pain. There's real pain that people are experiencing, and they shouldn't be experiencing it alone and feeling like they're alone. Because, the society that we all want to live in, that we were hearing about, wanting to raise our kids and grandkids, it's not this one, right? It's the one where we can have those conversations and know that someone isn't going to sort of just attack you and that you're going to feel like, why'd you even start the conversation? you can hear that criticism once you've built that sense of trust.
One comment right here.
Obviously, I'm not a person of color, I'm not Jewish, but I am here to be an ally. But I want to say that last year, Matt and I and others put together a unity march. We put it together to show that Miami is diverse, but we can be together. And so I did that because we wanted Miami to see this. Part of the what we're talking about here is relationships, connection, maintaining relationships with one another, but we also need to be visible in the community. People need to know not just what's going on when we have meetings like this, where these are all the people who want to be here, and people that don't want to be here don't know. And people who don't care don't see us. Don't see us in community, don't see us supporting one another. They don't see the Jewish community, the black community, the Jewish community. They don't see it. And I think it's important for us to be visible in Miami as well. And to pull all the actors together as well. I am certainly wanting us to continue these kind of dialogues. There are many other groups that are doing this kind of work in Miami. South Florida people of color are doing these difficult conversations right now. We have allies in this community. We're doing some of this work. We just need to build it and keep it going. And not let, the stresses that we're going to experience from the state or wherever stop us from continuing to get to know each other and build relationships. So when one of us calls and says, I need you to be here, we can all go. Because that needs to happen. Yeah.
I wanted to, I know we have some hands up, and I know we have to get that. You got them? Okay. I did want to say a few words about the word courage and trust. So I'm not my psychologist hat. Because courage is built by asking questions. And that's where the education piece comes in. I have to interrogate things. I have to ask questions. The process of raising one's hand and ask a question in a room full of people builds courage. So it's not a thing that I go to Publix and I go buy. So it's let me go get some courage. It's like, how am I going to do that, right? So I have to ask some questions. I have to ask, why do I do that? Why is this okay? Why do I wear my hair this way? Why do you act that way? Why do you speak that way? Why do you eat that? Why do I want breakfast? Like, you have to ask questions, and the more we ask questions, the more courage is built. Right? And we've sort of lost the art of asking questions because we come in with assumptions that as if I already know the answer, right? Already. And Matt started out this conference by saying we need to make sure that we are listening more. And we always say in the Haitian community there's a reason as to why the good old Lord gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? It's because we're supposed to listen twice as much as we, right? And which is important. The other piece I wanted to mention, which is about trust, because it's a word that we use, and we talk about trust as if like you either have it or you don't, right? Or I can go get it, right? But we know, like from a psychological perspective, that trust is an equation. It's an equation. It's a mathematical equation. It means it starts with, am I consistent? Am I reliable? When I say I'm showing up somewhere, and you say you're going to be there at 7, do you show up? Are you reliable? This plus, so reliability plus, is the words in your mouth when you say, I got you. Did you really mean that? Right? So is it valid? Do you say what you mean and mean what you say? And I can see that consistently. So reliability plus words are consistent, right, with that. Plus intimacy, which is where the spending time together comes in, right? And so that, yes, I can say, I'm going to show up to be at a place with you, and when I say I'm going to show up and back you up, I'm there, and I want to spend time with you. And that the more I do these things, the more trust is built, right? And so we have to put things into, like, break it down, like with kindergartners, to say, how am I building this trust? in this community, which means that I have to engage in some things. I have to do some things to help build it. And when the moment I said I'm going to show up someplace at 8 o'clock and you don't show up at 8 o'clock, guess what happened to trust? It starts to diminish because now you have to deduct from it, right? And so on. So I do think that if in fact we're talking about trust and we're talking about courage, we have to, there's a whole lot of this that begins with what is it I need to do? Not what other people need to do, but what is it I need to do to show up differently in this space? How am I going to create a sense of trust? How am I going to build the courage that I need in order for me to show up and respond to somebody in a way that is really effective? The work begins with us, it begins with you, it begins here first in order for us to be able to go to that on the outside. So thank you for the opportunity.
One comment over here and then coming up there.
You know, I want to say this as quickly as I possibly can. I don't want to take up too much time, but I want to go back to your question where you say what shifted, correct, between black and Jewish community. And a wise woman once told me to frame.
You mind standing so we can hear you?
Excuse me?
You mind standing?
Sure.
Thank you.
Listen, wise woman once told me if you frame the problem, you frame the solution. So going back to your question, what shifted? And I couldn't help but think and go back, and I'm no history buff, but I understand that I know my history. And it seems to me that one of the major things that has changed was the word they. He used that a lot, they. How is it that they, whoever they is, successfully separated the black family and not so successfully separated the Jewish family? At the height of the Jewish and the black relationship and bond, there was family. It was easier for Jews to communicate with blacks because they were communicating with mothers and fathers and daughters and sons. How is it that that shifted in the black community so vastly, but not the Jewish community? So let's kind of frame that a little bit and maybe focus in on that, because everything that everybody has said is perfectly fine and correct. Education, everything, courage, trust. But I think that's one of the major shifts, my opinion. I'll leave that to somebody smarter than me on the panel to fact check that. But that's just my opinion to answer the question.
Appreciate that. There's one up in the back.
Hi.
Yes.
Thank you for saying courage, because it's taking me a little bit of courage to say this. My name is Jenny Mullen-Ray. I'm the Executive Director of Miami Jewish Health Foundation. Sorry. Hi. I'm Jenny Mullen-Ray. I'm the Executive Director of Miami Jewish Health Foundation, and I've been with Miami Jewish Health for almost 10 years now. And before that, I was with the University of Miami School of Medicine for 10 years. And so I'm here tonight because I'm hearing all these stories, and I come to tonight with a very different, unique, and from a different position of privilege. My grandparents had to flee Cuba in 1959, unable to share with their parents that they were fleeing Cuba with my mother, and had to be snuck on a plane that was headed from Havana to New York that made an emergency landing in Miami, and they were snuck off the plane because my grandfather's family and their opposition to Castro. And my grandfather tells us the story of how he would walk the streets of Biscayne Boulevard and Flagler Street looking for work. And this is from a Cuban Catholic man who lived in a very isolated Cuban Catholic world. And a Jewish family gave him the job, his first job in the United States, as a clerk in the middle of the night, unboxing children's shoes. And this is a gentleman who was the vice president of Lloyd's of London for all of Cuba, and who was educated at the University of Havana and spoke English. And he was just so grateful for the opportunity that this family gave him. So when the owner would arrive, he in his broken English would give the Jewish owner the little bits of business advice that he would give him. And he started listening to him, and he started trusting my grandfather this man that was so foreign to him. And at that time, my grandfather, he then let my grandfather be the manager. And my grandfather talks about walking the streets looking for efficiencies. And on the buildings, there were signs that said, no dogs, no kids, no Cubans. And this was such a concept that was so foreign to my grandparents. And it was at a time when my grandfather encouraged a Jewish family to hire their first black employee. And they started people that were living in Overtown and areas that were underprivileged and underserved. And ultimately, 40 years later, my grandfather became one of their top partners. And it was through that grit. And so I was raised with that privilege of not seeing that division, but that my grandparents had this utmost reverence for African American families and for Jewish families. So it's such a blessing from God for me to have had that experience, as opposed to seeing it from a position of opposition, that it's what led my life into not-for-profit work. And so at Miami Jewish Health, we see the majority of the people that we care for are not Jewish. We're the largest provider of seniors in all of South Florida. And so I want to say about 75% of the people we care for are not Jewish. And within our PACE program, about, I want to say 70 to 80% are African American. And these are the most adult orphans. They're people that are left on our building, at our campus, whose families can no longer want to take care of them or afford to take care of them. So as I'm hearing about this division and this difference in how we're trying to unite, I've lived in Miami my entire life, and I've been privileged to work in my career with people that really do have the experience of wanting to unify these cultures and to wantify religions and societies. And so I come to you also, as he said, as an ally, because there's a lot more I feel that we have in common than we do have differences. And so thank you for saying courage, because it gave me the courage to say this. But so I thank you for all your help. And Matthew, you probably don't remember me, but you were really integral in our help with Give Miami Day, so thank you for that. The Miami Foundation, so thank you for that moment. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. Matt, thank you for organizing this conversation. My name is Marlon Hill. So first, I have a quick comment coming here today. Guerda, I have some questions for our governor. Because I'm just feeling very hurtful that when we talk about our existence, our experiences, our stories, I'd like to hear from the panelists how you feel personally about a government or anyone trying to erase your story from what you're sharing about people. So I have some questions for him because John was been involved in politics for a very long time. I've never felt this hurt by what a politician is doing personally. I'm trying to sort that out. So putting that aside, I wanted to ask the panel, what's the biggest misconception about you as a Jewish person or a black person that you would want to say to a non-black person or Jewish person that you think creates a gap of trust?
Should I jump in? That's a good one. So we had a couple of preliminary, we have one main preliminary Zoom and to discuss this evening. And we were, relaying some anecdotes and things of that nature, and I made a reference to the commonality of the slavery narrative between Jews and black people, and there being, a few thousand years that separates it, but it being relatively the same narrative. And subsequently, I made a comment. Someone said, and I think maybe Guerda said that they allow Jews to kind of, move forward.
No, that's not what I said.
Okay, so this is what I was afraid of.
That's okay. Yeah.
Let's have, do you want to
I
clarify?
remember there being a comment, maybe Monique, someone said they allowed Jews to move forward and progress, but black people did not, and maybe this is one of the shifts in, like, the divergence of the interests and commonalities of Jewish and black people. And I said, well, no one will let Jews move forward. They really clawed their way forward and continue to do so. And Monique stepped in and said that, you know, let me know, this was a very big learning moment for me, that this is a trigger statement for a lot of black people, that when Jews say or believe that, you know, they worked their way out of a certain situation or clawed their way out, is this reference to kind of pulling yourself up from the bootstraps and moving up. But the implication is that black people, the black community, are either lazy or didn't try hard enough, and therefore there's that rift. So I was, you know, kind of upset because it was not at all my intention to say something hurtful or even imply that black people or the black community have not tried hard enough or not hard enough or whatever. I don't even know. But this has, and I've been struggling with this learning moment. And the lady said to me, you know, are you comfortable if we talk about that? I said, I would like to actually discuss this because I've been struggling with it since a few days ago from our meeting. I did not have any notion that this is a trigger. And maybe jokingly, but not really jokingly, I said our next session should be a program called Tropes and Triggers, because clearly there are so many on many sides of the aisle for people. But I'll turn it over for you to explain, because it's such an important learning lesson.
Sure, and thank you for being the courage to ask the original question during our discussions, but also to be able to share, because there's a lot of similar sentiments that I think not only the Jewish community but American society have. And so just to kind of give you the context of the conversation, it was really started by a recognition from Dr. G of the need to give context to this conversation about the division and how systemic influences, so when we say they, or people used to say the man or who, the system, the big power construct has orchestrated itself in order to allow for these divisions to happen. The baseline is that it's by design. And at a certain point, the design, of course, you know, power never concedes anything. But at a certain point, the design had to recognize its need for certain communities. And so what I try to convey to Mojdeh is that the trigger comes because of historical traumas and biases and accusations against the black community, and assertions that it's a lazy community and don't want to work. And we can trace that, of course, all the way to the point of slavery, when the very people who were being beaten to their bones and starved to death, but still building the country, and someone on a horse in the shade could say that that person is lazy, but that's where it comes from. But then it extends to our current society in the sense where even if it is the idea of a level playing field. And so when you say, well, the Jewish community had an equally oppressed experience, but they clawed their way up. That's a matter of fact. But also, there's also a matter of privilege. And that privilege was bestowed by power. That privilege was not extended to the black community by that same power source. And so to exemplify that, I try to share my experience. My entire career, I owe to people from the Jewish community who felt it, recognized their own privilege, but also felt and saw something in me that they wanted to give back. And so from the point that I was in college to the point that I was in law school, and I shared with the group, John, about your mentoring program and how me being a part of that was by way an extension of that privilege. So we go the real world example. I said, well, you know, the Jewish people, they clawed their way up. At a certain point, the bankruptcy practice was reserved to the Jews because no one else wanted to do the work, until, of course, they learned that it was quite lucrative. By that point, the Jewish community had developed, the lawyers that practice in that area had developed an expertise. And so at that point, the system allowed them maybe to go into white shoe law firms, or frequented or needed to visit Jewish-owned law firms. And so the system allowed for that privilege to happen. But then those in that community appreciating their privilege, like John, to say, I'm going to not only master this practice area, I'm also going to teach it to my colleague. I'm also going to extend mentorship opportunities specifically for Black law students. That is that recognition, and I think that that's an important part of that story. So I say all of that to say, you almost, it's not that you can't acknowledge the fact that the Jewish people did, you know, claw themselves up. And that could be a million different industries. It could be Hollywood. You can say, when people say, you know, the Jews run Hollywood, and I say, well, they did the work that no one else wanted to do, and they mastered it, and so they got the benefits. There's a lot of other things that go into it, and there's a lot of biases and racism and power constructs, but the baseline, you can say the same thing about the financial industry. It's going to continue to carry on, but it's at what point the people in power decide that they're going to extend it.
Thank you. I mean, I think, you know, that was such a beautiful example of that willingness to share and be in real relationship. Marlon Hill, you know, characteristically thoughtful question, and you're really, you know, such an important leader in this relationship. I feel lucky to call you a friend. You know, one of the misconceptions about the Jewish community that I hear that, you know, always disturbs me is the Jews only care for themselves. And you know, I think about the reaction to trauma, right? And so the reaction to the Holocaust in particular, you know, you have this sort of, you know, twofold reaction. So you have one that says never again, right? This saying never again. And to some people, that means never again will we, as a tiny minority in the world, 15 million people out of however many billions there are, allow ourselves to be so vulnerable that we can be exterminated by a society in Germany where Jews were just as successful as they are here, modern society that just turned evil and wanted to scapegoat our community that's been scapegoated for thousands of years. And so, you know, part of our community says we just won't allow that to happen. We won't allow Israel to become the Jew of the nations and be treated like no other country and held to double standards and delegitimized like no other country in the world is. So you have that sense of we're gonna protect ourselves. Now the other reaction by many people, and I assume many people in this room, and I know my mom is here tonight and was on the Civil Rights Board of the Civil Rights Institute in Birmingham, Alabama, and was part of the integration of the University of Alabama, and that's the tradition I grew up in. And the reaction to the Holocaust from that idea of never again is, never again will we be bystanders. Will we allow others to be bystanders? And that's the biggest story coming out of the Holocaust, and why the story that GableStage is telling is so important, because there aren't a lot of stories about people standing up and having that courage. It's mostly about bystanders who said, maybe they weren't actively involved in sending Jews to Auschwitz or, the sort of, oppression and ultimate destruction. But they stood by and they allowed it to happen. And so as Jews, we should understand that same thing. When we see injustice, when we see these things that Monique is talking about, we really do have to stand up and be counted. And so it's that interplay of like, being worried about our own safety and security because we've seen how things can change on a dime, and at the same time knowing that it's our destiny, it's our religious mandate, to stand up for others. So that concept always bothers me, when people say that Jews. The other is that we're monolithic, that we're all white. And as we heard from the very beginning, there are black Jews, there are Jews of color, and frankly, we need to amplify their voices in the fight against anti-Semitism and against racism. And we're actually learning, ourselves. We can hear it. Sometimes it's that trust. When we hear it from Jews of color, we are proud to be Jews, but also we're saying, guys, you have some racism in your ranks. It's sometimes easier to hear. So anyway, those are two.
I see. Just one comment there, and then we'll come right back.
And you can stop me very quickly on this. I've listened very intently. I've been here 50 years now. Brought back a lot of memories of what it was, how it has changed. But I want to move to, I'm looking at the age in the room, with very few exceptions. We're a very different generation. And my question for those of you who work with younger people or your organizations, with schools, what do we see about the next generations down a couple? Are we seeing changes in attitudes and relationships with the young people? And are we fostering that? And if not, what can we do?
That's a wonderful question. At the very end, we're going to go through some solutions, and I'll mark that down so we can explore that, how we make sure that we're bringing the youth along in this journey. Thank you.
I wanted to address Marlon's question because Marlon always has a way of dropping things, in spaces like that. That was really, really powerful, and it really got me thinking a bit because I have to think about this intersectionality, right? So we're going to couch this and all of that because I'm a woman, which has its also, I'm a black woman, right? And I'm a black woman with an accent from Haiti, right? So bring all of that to the table in terms of like dissecting like where that whatever misconception is. But my biggest issue that I have to deal with as a professional who's been doing her job for over 30 years as a licensed psychologist in this country, has been a professor, full professor for the last 28 years I've been in academia, that I still have to deal with the issues of competency. I have to show up and show that I am competent to do this thing that I'm asked to be done or to be in this position that I'm in and so forth. And so even at UM, when I took on this position to be head of a unit at UM, I didn't realize I was the first black person to head a division at the University of Miami historically until I started getting flowers from black people and other people. But that meant. But what it also meant is that there are people that my assistant would actually schedule for me to see. And then I would be coming to my office and I would say, hi, how are you? You're here, you have an appointment here. They're like, yes, I'm here to see Dr. Nicolas. I'm just gonna wait, when she shows up, and so I don't need anything. So then I have to pause for a moment and say, in your mind, what does Dr. Nicolas look like? Because this could be a long wait for you, because there's a sense that people don't expect that a woman is showing up as a head of something, or a black person is going to show up, and definitely not one with an accent showing up. So this piece around, so once you have that misconception, then it's hard for you, so then it's going to take some space for us to develop this trust. Because now I have to be able to sit with you, even though you didn't think I was competent, but now I'm forced to sit with you to have a conversation about whatever it is you came into my office for. Right? And so that's already that. You see how that creates a little, and that's not going to allow us to start be intimate with each other and want to drink tea with each other, right? And so forth, because we have to jump that hurdle, right? Associated with that.
Chris, did you want to respond to Ron's question? Sure. I think perhaps what would be helpful is to understand from a heritage perspective just how American black people are, right? In a country that prides itself as being one of the greatest nations in the world, black people played a huge role in created it. And the culture that exists is due in large part that we enjoy, that we appreciate, that we love to the contributions of Black people. I'll use myself as an example. One of my great-great-great-grandfathers fought in the Civil War for the Confederacy of Black people. And he was discharged as a Union soldier because obviously the Union won. My uncles are members of the Sons of the American Revolution because we have ancestors who fought in the Revolutionary War. And the generations that passed from that time up until now, even in my own family, have made great contributions to this country. And I feel that sometimes America tries to dispossess the contributions of Black people. And there will be people who come to this country, we'll say in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, and immigrated here, and they're just as much as a part of America as anybody else, but they will take ownership of the country in the context of dealing with a Black person who's been here for 200 or 300 years. And so, as we sit here today, we contribute to this narrative about what's going on in 2023. And 100 years from now, somebody will say there was a conversation at the GableStage about this, these Jewish and Black relations, and nobody will ever be able to take that from us. But there were things that happened 200 or 300 years ago that people are trying to take from us as if they never happened. And so I am a part of this country's heritage just as much as anybody else.
Thank you. My name is Francis Raju, and in listening, there are several things that came to mind because the question we started on is education, and then as Brian mentioned in terms of never again, and I come from a small island called Trinidad, part of the Twin Island state of Trinidad and Tobago, and being taught about Christopher Columbus in school. And recently on Saturday, as Monique mentioned in terms of UPAC, we had a discussion relative to the African American studies that is the governor is silencing. And I asked the same question, if it is, as the Jews say, never again, that they take away teaching of the Holocaust in school, what will the Jewish community do about it? The Sun Sentinel had an interesting article just recently, and it's speaking in terms of Rosewood, and what was going on in Rosewood. We have Tulsa and what was done to people in a thriving community of Blacks who had everything going on what was done. And we see in terms of the elephant in the room is what the politics of today is being done in the state. And recently, as of today, in fact, I was reading an article in reference to the mayor's conference that recently took place. Mayor Suarez was saying that he don't support the bail reform. And in so doing, the governor stated that that will never happen in the state of Florida, bail reform. We take that and we look in terms of what is happening with regards to, again, the studies. If I cannot teach about the history, and I know Chris said, yes, you can teach, but not everybody is equipped with the knowledge to teach their kids. So it ought to be taught the same way that the Holocaust will always be taught in the schools. We ought to have that opportunity so they can learn, and then they can teach, because you have to learn first. Okay? And the question is, where do we go from here? We look in terms of just last week with regards to what this governor has done with the state prosecutor who said he's not going to prosecute for the abortion rights and so forth, and took away his job from there. And yes, the court said he won, but they kind of reversed to give him back his position. Are we going to continue? And we're supposed to be the highest traded animal kingdom, but anytime you corner any animal, they react to protect. When are we get to that point to react, to do something about what is being done? Or are we going to continue to allow him to do what he wants to do? And we can see it start. Look what happened in Broward County with the school board. We see the transformation in Miami-Dade County with the school board, where the politics is playing a part in everywhere and our rights. And freedom of speech is being taken away from us. And the one question to my lady who came from Cuba, I asked myself, when I see that the greater majority of the Cuban American in this country who came from an oppressed, taking away their rights, is supporting that which is being done to another community, and we are supporting that, and they have turned the table and said, well, socialism, but you are encouraging it by supporting what the governor is doing because of the politics. So the question is, how long are we going to allow the politics to dictate and have us operate in the silence, and when it is going to be that never again can we stand, and together that message needs to be sent from the Jewish community that we are not going to allow this governor to take away the freedom, because again, when you do the history about Christopher Columbus, which was put as this great person and know all of the things that he has done in the world, he should not be taught in school because he has done worse than some of those that he tried to put there that we should not speak about. That's my contribution.
Great point. Anyone on the panel want to respond to that idea, that concept of how do we move forward from this? Good question. Okay, we have one question right here. Does anyone want to respond to that question? Of what do we go from here? Okay.
Well,
let's do up there, and then we'll come down.
So I'm actually a new Miamian. I just moved from Boston, actually a year and a half ago. I'm actually a Cuban Jew, so I'm a bit of a mutt, as they say. And I wanted to make a comment about the contributions of African Americans, the Black community. I just came back from DC, where I was at the Museum of African American History, and there's an amazing exhibit that actually articulates and quantifies the contributions of Blacks in America. So if you haven't gone to see it, I haven't had the opportunity, it's amazing. We went on MLK weekend, it was a madhouse, it was awesome. I've been there before because I was at a bank that helped write the ticket, but it's an awesome museum and I encourage everybody to go to. With respect to, that's a lot, there's a lot in your comment. As somebody who's come from Massachusetts, where every single politician was a liberal Democrat, coming to Florida is a culture shock for me. I mean, it really is, right? So, I mean, you gotta vote the guy out. I mean, you know, if you don't, I mean, I'm not gonna I kind of did make a political statement, but, you know, Ron DeSantis is not a dumb guy, but he's wrong. And, you know, there's gotta be other people in the political discourse in the state of Florida. And that's the solution. Well, it's the solution. And it's, you know, we've got a Supreme Court that's not running in the right direction. So one of the biggest solutions is to get the right people in office to do the right thing.
I think that's a fair statement, and I think there's a lot impacting the ability for the residents of this state to vote in a governor or any leader that is actually reflective of the people who live here.
But why is that?
Well, there's like redistricting. It is by design, and there's a number of reasons why in Florida, whether it's even the proximity to polling places, all of the ways in which you look at Georgia, that they ensured that folks were removed from the voting rolls, where that was fair and unfair. There's a number of systems in place that prevent just what you're suggesting. However, that doesn't mean that those challenges can't be surmounted.
Exactly.
And there's a number of organizations and activists and politicians and leaders who are out there on the front line galvanizing people across the state to do just that. So it's not hopeless, it's a challenge, but it's not.
Well, maybe some of those New Yorkers and Bostonians that are coming down here will, like, you know, join the force and help change.
This young lady has been waiting very patiently. Okay. Then
I want to move us away from the political conversation, just for a moment, because and it's not to say it's not important, but often that we've been down whenever these like systemic issues happening, and then there's one joker who acts a particular way, and we're like, we just have to get rid of that. And if we get rid of it, like everything is going to be okay. But I think we have to look at the larger systems issues that we're doing, because here's the situation that just happened, and when Marlon said that, you know, like I have questions, right? Because individuals have allowed for people to become a thing that we literally thinkification is a term where we become a thing that black folks have just now become a thing in a book as opposed to individuals, right? As opposed to people with experiences and so forth, right? And so how do we move? Because I want to move us beyond this idea we just think, because when we do that, we dehumanize it, right? That we think of it like, oh, it's something that is in a book, and if we just need to get it back in the book, everything will be okay. But then it's dehumanizing people in terms of their lived experience and who we are. So, like, what is the process for us to move us away from, right, this conversation, this discourse around the fact that the things in the book, right, as if like if we say, yes, allow the thing in the book, everything is going to be, that's going to solve the problem, right? But allowing people to get at what my colleague was saying around the importance of the experience of who I am as a person, as an individual whose families contributed significantly to the fabric of this particular community. It's about people, not about a thing that's in chapter 2 of a book, right? It's not a footnote, right? And that's a different narrative. That's a different conversation that we need to have around this.
I see a bunch of hands. I'm going to try to go in order. This young man has been waiting patiently. Go here.
I'm not a young man. I'm the only John Wesley Jew that you'll ever meet. I converted over 50 years ago. And so when I was a John Wesley moving to Miami over 50 years ago, I can tell you that most people didn't think I was Jewish. And I heard lots of anti-Semitic things. And I heard lots and lots of racist things. I grew up in St. Louis, which was meanly segregated. We had the most white flight after the Civil Rights Act of '64 was enacted. And I was in high school in '64, so I went to the white-only bathrooms. But my mother had the courage to say, this is not right. And we sat on the wrong sides of the lunch counters. And so that's where I came from. And I think that what we all need to do is go back and tell people what we heard tonight. I can't wait to tell people that Christopher Lomax has a relative that fought for the Confederacy. Now, you can talk about why he did that, and I'm fascinated. I want to hear that. But I don't think we have to get on a plane and fly to Tallahassee for people who will not listen to us. I think we have to open up our doors, and each one of us could have lunch, an open lunch with several of the people in this room, get to know people, and also recognize, MCCJ has recognized it so well. It used to be Christians and Jews. It's now the big umbrella. My mother would say, bigots don't have one issue. They don't like you. They don't like Catholics. They don't like women. They don't like gays. They don't like blacks. They don't like Jews. So it's the rest of us who have to fight back from the people who had power, who are afraid of losing it. And that's, to me, if each one of us had a lunch and a dinner with somebody they don't know, or somebody they don't know well, that's an amazing story, and I'm touched by it. And when somebody says education, you're absolutely right. We don't have an emphasis on education, but you have to do it both in the schools and outside the schools. People that are Jewish don't wait for chapter 3 to talk about the Holocaust. We talk about it all the time with ourselves.
And blacks have to talk about slavery and Jim Crow all the time. And we may have had some differences between the blacks and the Jews. But my God, I don't think there's any Jew who wasn't touched by Black Lives Matter. I don't think, and if there was, shame on them. But we also have to think of the Muslims and the Asians that are being killed and discriminated because they're Muslims or they have funny names. So our tent is bigger than this, and we can beat them, or we can sure as hell improve our lives and enjoy our lives better by getting to know the stories that inspired Monique and you to have that discussion. I was so moved by that because you maybe touched a nerve. You're well-intentioned. Everybody here knows you're well-intentioned. And this man, who I love, just corrected me the other day. You know, like, hey, John, you shouldn't say this. You should say it this way. And it made me a better person, I hope. So thank you.
John, thank you for sharing that. And I love that you framed your comment in what you are committed to do. So I would love as we wrap up, and we only have a few more minutes here, and I'm gonna try, I know there's some folks who've been patient, so I'm gonna get to these comments, but I would love for, as we're making these comments, to just share, if there is something that you are committing to do when you walk out of this room to ensure that this conversation doesn't end here, let's share that with each other in this moment.
Okay. So one of the things that I think happens in these conversations is that we learn of the structural racism within the culture and the laws and policies. We don't know that. I don't know that. Unless I'm in conversation with you all, with people who are experiencing it. And then can feel motivated to help do something about that. And oh, by the way, I'm Reverend Tom Capo. I'm the minister of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Miami. I didn't introduce myself before. One of the things I want to be committed to is to bring somebody from this panel to my church to talk with my community so that they can begin to understand some of these issues. And if any of you are willing to do that, I would be more than happy to make a space for that to happen and begin this conversation with us.
Yeah, evening everyone, Jared Davis here. One thing I wanted to highlight, sort of the low-hanging fruit, I was thrilled to hear somebody ask, what about the youngest generation, Gen Alpha and Gen Z? If you do a survey, there's been actual studies on this, guess what's the most compelling source of information for Gen Alpha and Gen Z right now in Miami-Dade County?
TikTok.
It is TikTok. There's a specific TikTok. Instagram/Facebook. It's the same account. Oli and Dade. It has been shown that Oli and Dade has more influence over Gen Z, Gen Alpha than Miami Herald, everything else combined. And so one thing I want to point out, when the whole Kanye West debacle happened, one of the most powerful things I saw was Russell Simmons delivered a TikTok video where he explained his historical relationship with the Jewish community and why he cherishes that community so much. And it went on for like 45 minutes. Wow. And he gave an in-depth explanation of certain misconceptions about the Jewish community, the black community, etc. One thing MCCJ can do, this is low-hanging fruit I think for you guys, is find those influencers, both local and national, who young black Americans and young Jewish Americans listen to, and ask them, I suspect they'd be happy to do so, ask them, can you help us further this dialogue? Because all you need is one mega influencer and you hit 500,000 people. So to me, that's the low-hanging fruit. You don't need, what the governor did was stupid, but you don't need a textbook. I would go so far as to say a lot of children don't get educated anymore through traditional education. I mean, we talk about it all the time. I hosted a panel where President Frank and all the other presidents of the university presidents sat on my panel. We talked about alternative modes of education. So I think it's easy because it hurts so much to get distracted by what the governor did and obviously fight, and obviously I'm with you, I'm voting them out. But also, let's not get distracted. Gen Alpha and Gen Z does not do things the way we did. And so when you hear it, I feel like we're translating ourselves that Jared Davis, 30, 40 years ago, without that textbook, without that course, would have been cheated that education. Gen Alpha, Gen Z may not care. It may not impact them because they learn in a very different mode. And so my recommendation is don't forget technology, don't forget how that generation learns, and leverage that. While he's over here doing this, you can be far more effective by going over here deploying a whole new strategy.
I think even just being a professor in the classroom, because I'm dealing with 18 years old and up, I think there is a shift in the young folks in the way that they are able to engage in the difficult conversations, right? That I'm seeing more so now than I think I see with their parents, right? But there's a socialization that takes place also on my network of individuals in terms of what is expected of me, and then the difference in terms of how I'm showing up with my peers and and so on. So I do think that I do want to give credit for these young people, because I do think they are forcing the envelope in a way that I don't think their parents or their grandparents have done.
We've got time for 2 more comments. Let's do 2 more comments right here.
I'm going to bring it down to hopefully practical level. We're here as Blacks and Jews. We're members of organizations, ethnic organizations, AJC, JCRC, some National Jewish Lawyers Association involved in. There's other organizations out there, and in these other organizations, they're non-ethnic organizations, they may be art organizations, they may be educational organizations. We're looking for diversity. And when I say diversity in this town, I'm not talking about more women or more Latinos or anything like that. We're looking for young Black people in this community to be able to become members of the organization. I know that costs money. If you're a member of an organization and you're on the board of an organization, you have to pay. But if we could have a place, people that we can talk to, and you may know people, you may know Blacks that want to belong to some of these organizations, whatever kind they are, because I can tell you, in organizations that I'm involved in, we're grasping, we're looking for Blacks because we want that kind of diversity in the organization. For a lot of reasons. Some mercenary reasons, because grants look at things like that on boards, but really, and we need other views. And that's one of the things, I don't know how we can do it, if it's a clearinghouse, maybe it's a form of affirmative action, which maybe that's the only place where it's going to be affirmative action anymore. But I think it's something that we can really focus on. So I throw that out.
You said it better. Your city, part of your answer, it's the arts. And if everybody would go out of their comfort zone and join an organization and learn about an organization, whether it's the Skya, 100 Women of Deering, something that's out of your wheelhouse, something you would never think to go to, and try to present your opinion, make friends with people, get on committees. I know the 2 art museums I'm involved with, IC and PAM, both have extensive Black collections. They have huge parties, they have wonderful education programs, and they have a lot of diversity on their boards. But they could always use more, and that's where you meet people, that's where you get involved with things, and that's where you make a difference with children. And I think education and children is, I know the social media is probably the best thing, but that's hard to do. Maybe you can do that too. But you start at the bottom, you start what's easy. And it's easy to go on those boards, just like that gentleman said. Find organizations, they'll want you. And make yourself visible. Don't be invisible anymore, and go where it's not comfortable, where there's not 5,000 people like you, but you're 1 or 2 people alone, and make a difference. And I think that would be a welcoming thing, that you do a service to the community. You really would.
When you say go where you're not comfortable.
Exactly. Get out of your comfort zone.
Amen to that.
And that would be all of us, right? All of us, and I think that
And also extend the invitation to someone. The corollary to that is that we that are on those boards and in those organizations are actively and intentionally extending the invitation, opening the door, pulling out the chair, and encouraging that attendance and participation from people there. That's a part of that commitment as well.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say something about Miami Town.
Metro.
Town, sorry. In Alabama, it was any town, and it's 33 years old now. Brian went to the very first one in 1989. That's who he is because of Anytown, he'll tell you. And I've seen it work so well. Metrotown, this is where we get to the children, and they live the experience. And that's what makes the difference. It has to be livable.
Wonderful job today. We did good. To our panel, Brian, Dr. G, Monique, Chris, Mojdeh, incredible insight. Thank you all so much. And to all of you for staying the course this evening and knowing that this does not stop here, but that we are all now committing to go and evangelize so that we can continue to build these coalitions and these connections with Miami-Dade. So with that, thank you so much.